Vamos a presentar la segunda actividad de la primera jornada del Filba Internacional en el Museo MALBA. En esta mesa, que es un diálogo entre Sacco y Guy Delisle, que lleva por título Líneas de Acción, y va a estar moderado por Tomás Dassance. La charla va a avanzar sobre cómo la documentación de la realidad encuentra en el cómic un camino singular y nuevo para dar testimonio del contexto. Crónica, diarios y periodismo gráfico responden al realismo con un alto nivel de atención al detalle y dosis proporcionadas de imágenes y texto. Dos de los más importantes novelistas gráficos contemporáneos dialogan sobre cómo es contar el mundo hoy a través del cómic. Desde Fundación Filba queremos agradecer a todos los sponsors que hacen posible que este festival se haga, y en particular, sobre esta mesa, queremos agradecer a Comicópolis y a la Embajada de Francia, que nos han apoyado en la presencia de los dos autores. Muchas gracias a todos, los dejo con los invitados.
Buenas noches, gracias a todos por venir. Supongo que ya conocen las dos figuras que tenemos hoy a la noche. Por las dudas las voy a presentar para el público que no las conoce. Tenemos a Sacco, de Estados Unidos, y Guy Delisle, canadiense, radicado en Francia desde hace unos 20 años. Son dos de las mayores figuras actuales del periodismo en historieta o de la historieta reportaje. Son dos de los mayores exponentes por su obra, por su trabajo y por los libros que han alcanzado un público muy importante a nivel mundial, con obras traducidas en todos los idiomas. La idea es que se genere un diálogo entre ellos, pero voy a empezar con una pregunta, la pregunta por ahí más obvia y de arranque, que es ¿cómo y por qué, how and why, did you start to make comic journalism in a time when comic journalism was not so easy and known as now? Why and how?
Okay. Can you hear me?
You can get it.
I can. Oh, okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. I've got to say it was, in some ways, it was an accidental process. I was already trying to do comics, like humor comics, satire, but I was very interested in what was going on in the world. And, I mean, to make a long story short, I really wanted to go to the Palestinian territories and see how Palestinians lived under occupation. The truth is, I was interested enough in that subject that if I was a filmmaker, I would have gone to make films about this. But I was a cartoonist. So I thought, well, I'll go and I will take notes and I will tell my experiences of traveling around, because I came out of an autobiographical tradition of cartoonists. Back in the 1980s, there were a lot of North American cartoonists doing autobiographical work. So it wasn't such a stretch for me to imagine doing autobiographical comics in the Palestinian territories. When I got there, I found myself being a little more careful in how I collected stories. And I realized that that had to do with the fact that I studied journalism. So I have sort of journalistic blood in my veins. So instead of just talking to people casually, I began taking notes, asking them a lot of questions. If I met someone and he told me he was in prison, I would say, can I meet more people to fill out the story, more people who've been in prison. I began looking around, seeing what do I need to discover to get a very good overall picture of the occupation. So I began behaving as a journalist, because that was my studies. And then it sort of developed by itself from there. I didn't have a theory before I went. I mean, the theory develops afterwards when people like you ask me questions about it. Then I have to come up with answers. But it was a very organic process.
And you, Guy?
Yeah, well, me it's very different because I started doing comics quite late. I stopped reading comics at one point because I couldn't find stuff that I really enjoyed, like a lot of people of my generation. And then I discovered when I was working in France the independent movement of comic books, and I realized that these people were people of my age doing comic books for people of my age. So I started to do short story with these guys, and it was very exciting, the stuff they would do. And I was doing for 5 years short stories in a magazine, and then I went to China. That was for my work, and I have a very bad memory. So I said, this time I'm going to take notes, because I was in China 5 years before doing the same work in Nanjing, and I almost completely forgot about the trip because my memory is very bad. So I thought, well, this time I'm going to remember it, and to do so, I will take notes, everyday life type of notes. And so I came back to France, and I was thinking, just like Joe, at the time there was a lot of people in my magazine doing autobiography, and I was thinking I would like to try that narrative form, to be there and to, well, actually to draw myself. I was a bit shy to do that, but the form was interesting. So anyway, I draw myself, and I thought some of these stories that happen in China could work as a short story. It was not planned to be a book. And there was other people who've done that, traveling and using comic books, like Jean-Christophe Menu, but it was very short. So I did one short. It was 16 page in the magazine, and then I did another one, and then after a while people started to really enjoyed it, and I got really good feedbacks, and they were all saying you should do a book with that, and then we decided at l'Association to do a book, and it became Shenzhen, but it was not planned to be a book right at the beginning.
And did the example of the Joe Sacco work inspire you in this work, or it was?
I read it a bit after, because you were published at Drawn and Quarterly, the first one. When was it out? Do you remember?
The first Drawn and Quarterly, boy, I don't know, 1998 or something like that.
Oh, okay. So I was in China in 1997. I did like the first story right after. And I've read your book, I think. Yeah, no, I was not aware when I started to do that. And but even so, I've read Joe's book afterwards, and his work as a journalist. You see in the book, and I think I've read Gorajde, the first one, and I thought it was fantastic work. But even when I was reading that, I felt that I was not in the same direction. We don't work in the same direction, even though there's lots of things in common. It's autobiographical. We even have been in the same country. I feel it's not opposite, but it's very different, and there's lots of space that could be filled by other people, I'm sure. So I was influenced, like a lot of things I've read, but afterwards, because I've seen, okay, we can. When I read is Gorajde, I said, oh yeah, someone can do that. If you come from a journalist background, you go there, you work with notes, and you come back. But me, I have a different way of working.
And you have answered quite this question, but why the autobiographical theme of the comics? Why don't you tell the story just like
A journalist would do.
A journalist would do.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I like to draw myself, so that's part of it. But like I said, it was very natural. I was doing stories about, before I did my journalism, you know, a story about breaking up with my girlfriend. You know, I'm obviously in this story. And I was just carrying over that sort of idea of doing autobiographical stories in comics form. But at some point, as I was doing it, I realized it has a real value, because if you draw yourself, it's clear to the reader that the reader is seeing things through your eyes. I studied American-style journalism, which is supposedly objective, and I felt this is a good way of getting away from that objectivity and showing that actually when you're traveling, you're a foreigner in a strange land, you're seeing things very subjectively. So it's like when you draw yourself, you're the pronoun I walking around. But there's another reason. I think Guy probably feels this too. There are simply too many things that happen to you that involve interactions that if you draw them, it'll show a lot about a community. You know, it'll really give you a sense. It's the interactions that I think matter. When I come back from one of my journeys, people often ask me, what was it like? And I don't pull myself out of the story and say, well, in 1893 this happened, and that's why it's happening, you know, that's why this is happening. I'd say I met these people, and this is what they told me, and they took me into their homes. I mean, these are human, warm stories. I'll give you one example. When I was in this place, Gorazda, in eastern Bosnia, it was at the end of the war, and people couldn't leave the city. They hadn't left the city for 3.5 years, but I could go with a press card, and I could go from Gorazda to Sarajevo. So people were always giving me presents or letters to take to people in Sarajevo, people they hadn't seen in 3.5 years. You know, a woman would say, I haven't seen my husband since the war began. Can you find him in Sarajevo and give him this letter? Now, how do you tell that story and leave yourself out of it? It's not that you're the important part of the story, but it's a way of sort of humanizing the whole thing.
Yeah, it's so convenient way of telling a story as well, because you're in there and you show the people. It's if you don't put yourself in the comic, it's going to be you take a big distance with the reader, and it's going to be very cold. And if you're in there, you take the reader by the hand, and I go again doing the same thing I've done when I was there, and I go around the corner of a street in Jerusalem, and I say, look, you know, here you can go up there, and then you're on the roof of a Jerusalem building, and it's very nice. So you're in there right at the present. You're reliving the present, and that's really interesting. And you can have a very feeling of complicity with the reader, and that's what I like. And like Joe was saying, when you put yourself there, people know where the information comes from, because I explain right from the beginning, and you tell right away that it's going to be subjective, because I'm this guy. I'm not even the guy who goes there. I'm just following my wife, and I don't know nothing about the situation, and I'm not a specialist. I'm not a journalist. I don't know nothing about the Middle East, but here it goes, and I'm going to try to understand what's going on for the rest of the year who's there. So you're very frank with the reader, and he can always say to himself, well, he didn't get that because he doesn't know nothing, he doesn't know what he's talking about and all that. So he knows that it's subjective, and I really like that. When you read a newspaper and you have someone who's been there, and he says, okay, this is this, and it happened there, and that's why, because of this. You have no space for yourself where you say, maybe he's not right, maybe he didn't get that. But with autobiography, you have a big space for the reader to analyze that.